We're recording this session, and thanks very much everyone for joining. So I know many of you are breaking into a really busy working schedule, and some of you will be listening to it as a recording. So thank you very much for taking the time. We've all seen, like you, a year like no other, huge challenges, and that's all required significant agility and ingenuity in every geography and every business around the planet, really. And we've all reflected what we would have liked to have had in place had we been able to respond faster, have more agility, to be able to see the opportunities for our businesses and contain costs. And I'm Susan Davis. I lead the UK Invent team focused on supply chain. And since 2000, I've been involved with leading businesses through large-scale supply chain change, always with new processes and organisation, and often with new technology. And in the last 3 years, that's really centred around digital transformation, analytics and operating models to get the balance right between local, regional and global. And I'm bringing that experience into the supply chain transformations that I get involved in. So welcome to everybody. And in particular, welcome to my colleagues that are joining me from across Europe and across from the US. So I'd like to introduce you to Wouter. Wouter is leading a global proposition for Control Tower, the Cognitive Control Tower, and has a wealth of experience in designing and implementing control towers for consumer products and manufacturing companies. So thanks, Wouter. He'll be taking us through a lot of the material today. We also have Camille, also from the Netherlands, and Camille's a specialist in control tower strategy, and as well as an experienced TMS implementation consultant. So thanks to you, Camille, as well. Navim, working alongside me in the UK, focuses on the global integrated operations offering, lead for us there, and he's working in consumer product companies, focusing to delivering seamless, agile, forecast to cash value chain, which is a bit of a mouthful, and Navim's going to talk you through some examples of his work there. And we also have Joe joining us from the US, Supply Chain Analytics and Transformation Practice Leader. Thank you, Joe. And Joe's focusing on creating solutions in the convergence space of strategy, process, and AI and machine learning technology. So when we talk about control towers, you see that we're really talking about cognitive control towers, and that's something that Joe's really been expert in and helped us be navigating the cognitive aspect of that. So thank you all for joining, and thank you everybody on the phone dialing in. So as we talk through this, we're really going into a section really in thinking through on the next page really of what does it really mean for us and our clients. So our clients really, their goals have really been amplified by going through a year of COVID. So they've really focused on what can they bring in terms of innovation. For many in the consumer product space, focusing on much more personalization, how to deploy their assets that they set up for scale at much smaller batch sizes, and how do they enable that through increased agility. Their goals are also growth, and how to meet that through new channels to market. And we're all seeing that. You know, I think we've all been buying differently throughout this year, and that's really amplified a move that we're seeing. And we've got a report actually coming out next week on the impact of COVID on the supply chain. So please let us know if that would be useful to you in considering the next move that you're going to make in your supply chain transformations. So we've got the growth that's coming through there, and that's really manifesting itself in new operating models. We've always got efficiency coming through, and we're seeing a lot of that answered through intelligence and automation in process execution. And then the last one here, sustainability. So as many people are recovering from COVID and rethinking their response, they're trying to do that in a sustainable way, so that they can, reduce miles traveled, reduce water, waste, energy consumption, and that's really becoming a focus, very prevalent in consumer products, but for all industries. I think these themes are really front and center of guiding them on the next steps that many of the supply chains make. And with that in mind, how we're looking at responding to that, we have these four particular areas that we're focused on today. We're talking about cognitive control towers, although we've also running within this webinar series, we've already had the connected autonomous planning, and we'll also be running one in a couple of weeks' time on connected manufacturing. So you can sort of see how we're shaping up some of the experiences and knowledge that we have against these four offerings that we're working with clients on. And the connected manufacturing one will be in 2 weeks' time, but cognitive control tower is really about the next generation, and it's really about being able to see the supply and demand and be able to respond to that, and in particular understand what that means for the cost to serve. And with that said, I'm going to pass across to Wouter, who's going to sort of take us through that. And while I just pass across, I just also make an advert for many of you have already submitted questions. Feel free to post those in the chat, and I'll be picking those up at the end. So as we go through, if there's things that occur to you, post those, and we'll field those at the end of the 40 minutes. Thanks very much. Over to you, Wouter.
Thank you, Susan. Just to get us started, Susan already mentioned some of the trends that we see in consumer products, and I'm going to make the step now to relate those a little bit more to the control tower and why it's relevant. So first of all, we see that supply chains are becoming more and more complex. We see more and more decentral partners, so local production as an example, or local players doing last mile fulfillment. All these kinds of more evolving ecosystems have a real impact on how you manage your supply chain, working with many more smaller companies instead of the big ones. The second one is about disruption and uncertainty. Of course, we've all seen COVID in the last year and what that's done. Many people wishing that they had visibility in place before that. But at the same time, it's not only about these big events that impact everyone around the world. It's also at a more local level where we see more and more customs restrictions or border closures for short periods of times. So uncertainty more in a global context is also at an all-time high. And what that requires is inventory levels, visibility on that across your entire value chain, so you can act when you're encountering such a disruption. And lastly, we see change in consumer demand. So we see that customers want more information about their products. Where were they produced? How were they transported? Did this all happen in an ethically sound manner? So that's what we call provenance of the goods. There's demand for that, and the control tower is very much suitable for getting that visibility on how products were moved and created. And we also see customer proliferation. So we see more and more e-commerce channels popping up and direct to consumer. And all of that requires a much more granular level of visibility. Now, before we dive deep into the cognitive control tower, I just want to spend a few minutes telling you what the control tower is in our vision at Capgemini, because control towers are a word that are used very frequently, also by different solution providers, but also by different supply chain managers. And my feeling is that they frequently mean something a little bit different. So I'm going to get started with how we see the control tower. And at a basis, the control tower gives a company visibility. So it's a capability that gives visibility of the end-to-end supply chain. And as a result of that, you're able to control and improve the entire supply chain. And for us, it consists of 4 dimensions. And as we go through these, to make it a little bit more specific, I'm going to try to use the metaphor of a real airport control tower, because what you see in such a control tower in aviation is that you have a group of people that's responsible for running the operations from the control tower. They're dedicated. They're in one room together, and the same applies to a supply chain control tower team, where you have a dedicated team of experts that have a decision mandate to make choices that will impact the entire supply chain. On the processes side, you see in an aviation control tower that there are standard processes and operating procedures. For example, when there's a takeoff, when there's a landing, there are procedures that must be followed. And those procedures give the people in the control tower the ability to steer so that they know what will happen when they take a certain action. In a supply chain control tower, it's very much similar in that you have to have harmonized processes for your plan, source, make, deliver, and return dimensions in the supply chain in order to be able to steer it. So a control tower operator in a supply chain needs to know that if he requests a certain action to be taken in a local warehouse or at production, that these will be the next steps. This will be a throughput time, and that will solve the issue that the company is encountering. Thirdly, there's the digital technologies and data. Also really important in an aviation control tower, where you have to have a system that shows you the planes that are coming on their way, the ones that are going to take off, and you have the radar screen showing where everything is all the time. Same kind of situation in a supply chain control tower, where you want to have a system that gives you visibility on where things are. So that's the core of at least getting the visibility in one place. And for us, these digital technologies and data consist of 4 parts. The first is the external and internal data that you're collecting. So this can be your WMS systems, your ERPs, your TMS as examples, but they are also the external systems that your company, or the external data that your company is getting in. So this can be track and trace updates from carriers. It can be inventory levels or delivery times from your suppliers. And all of that's coming together. And where that comes together is in the second element, and that's what we call the data lake or the data hub, where all the information that's required for the control tower comes together and can be seen. On top of that, you need a control tower system, and a control tower system. Here we mean not a dashboard, because that only gives you the visibility, but you can't act very efficiently. We really see a two-way system where you can view, but where you can also make changes and push those back into your supply chain processes as a really important part to having a successful control tower team. And lastly, the last dimension in the digital technologies and data is the cognitive area, where you see the data analytics, the decision support tooling, and also the intelligent automation. And that's the part that's really making it a cognitive control tower, which we'll speak to you about in a few minutes. But the last element of the control tower that I want to highlight is the collaboration. And in an aviation control tower, you also see that such a control tower is never working on their own. There's always different stakeholders or different air traffic controllers in different countries that they are working with, but also your ground operations and other partners that are in the same location and have the same purpose as you. Similar situation in a supply chain control tower, where the team has to work together with both internal parties, such as logistics, such as customer service, when there's an unexpected event that has customer impact, but also with external partners, for example, your freight forwarders or your suppliers, when they need to expedite a shipment or when they need to indicate updated inventory levels. So it's very much about collaboration, and that's really key to get things done, because the first few will give you the visibility, the first 3, but the fourth one, the collaboration, really allows you to get things done and to make those improvements in your supply chain when you have unexpected events that you have to respond to. Going back to digital technology and how a control tower becomes cognitive, we see three different levels of cognitive technologies. The first is around predictive analytics, which are really allowing you to identify challenges before they occur. So here you're using historic or sometimes real-time data to identify patterns, which will allow you to signal that something needs to happen. This is not yet giving you the solution, but it's telling you that you're at risk. And this risk identification is always the key and the core to doing any kind of cognitive technologies in your control tower, because this is the basis on which you take actions. And those actions can be driven or can be provided to control tower operators by using prescriptive analytics. And prescriptive analytics are all about using algorithms and optimizations to determine what the best options are in certain situations. So for example, if you have an order that's at risk that needs to move from A to B, but at predictive analytics level, you can see that the likelihood is very high that it's not going to make it on time, then a prescriptive analytics solution will take that risk and will tell you you have options A, B, or C to respond to that. You can move it from location C, from location D, from location E, all to that customer location, and the impact will be so much on cost, on lead time, and any other metrics that are important for a company. And then even potentially recommend the solution that the operator should take. The next level is all about smart decisions and automating those. So this is taking the prescriptive analytics, where we have the three options that I just mentioned, and basically taking that action automatically. So it becomes very much a self-healing supply chain that's constantly optimizing itself instead of requiring a lot of human intervention. Now, this automated decision making, of course, will need a pattern or historical data from the prescriptive level, that they see that in 90% of the cases, we always choose option one. In that way, the control tower can learn, or the software can learn to optimize itself. Now, why would companies want this? Why do companies need this in our perspective? And this comes very much down to two things why companies typically choose control towers. And these benefits that we are showing here are very much based on the normal, so to say, control tower, and not yet on the cognitive level. So we're convinced that they can be even higher when you get a lot of that automation in there. So typically companies choose for control towers for two reasons. The first is to reduce costs. And what we see frequently is that you're able to reduce your FTE costs as a result of process harmonization, but also as a result of reducing your manual activities through systems. So this can be a low level of automation, but it can also be at the higher levels of automation that we were just talking about in terms of prescriptive and predictive analytics. So that's even a higher potential there. And on the logistics and fulfillment side, we frequently see that by setting up a control tower in one location in one team, you get a lot more focus on spend in one team and on carrier sourcing, allowing you really to reduce the number of carriers that you're using and to get better rates. So we typically see a large decrease in transportation costs, which can also be driven by consolidating shipments across different locations as you start to get visibility. The second reason why companies typically choose control towers are around risk reduction. So we've seen events like COVID. We also see border closures. What if you're able to respond to those in a very quick manner and to be flexible at such times of stress? That's really what a control tower brings, and it's typically a bit more difficult to measure. So we've measured it at the store stockout level. From a planning control tower perspective, that you are able to reduce those stockouts, resulting in a higher customer promise and really being able to get things to your customers on time. However, sustainability is also a large benefit, because if you have visibility of all your transport movements and of your entire supply chain even, you're able to monitor emissions much easier, and you're also able to steer on them. So it's not quantifiable yet, but it is one that we see more and more interest from our clients. And lastly, the revenue lever. This comes down to really increasing your customer service levels because you're a better supplier to your customers, and you have an optimal supply chain, and that really allows you to increase your on time in full, resulting in a higher revenue. We've actually measured that increase in one of our projects. Coming to those projects, we've done a lot of control towers across the entire end-to-end supply chain. I'm just highlighting a few that we've done in the last 5 or 6 years or so, and we'll take you through a few examples on plan, source, make, deliver, and end-to-end. So in planning, we've set up a demand planning control tower, setting up a central team with a lot of data science capabilities as well, which resulted in a higher forecast accuracy of double-digit growth I'm talking about there, and in a large efficiency for the demand planning function. And sourcing for a global FMCG company, we've increased their visibility in their raw materials and their packaging purchasing from a central team, and increased the number of no-touch purchase orders that the team is able to get to set through. And that's really driving efficiency for them in manufacturing as well. In manufacturing at a different client, we've been able to improve the production efficiency by having visibility of their global factory, globally of all their factories in one dashboard, and having that overview. Once you have a disruption in one of those factories, it reduces the effort for inspections or for quality control because you have all of the data available to you in one location. In deliver, we see a increased transport efficiency for a large electronics manufacturer. And actually, my colleague Joe will tell you a little bit more about that case in a few minutes. And I was personally involved in the ABB example that you see here, that really reduced transportation costs by 2 to 3% and increased efficiency all across their deliver function. And they did this by setting up 10 regional control tower teams that really allowed them to manage their order to cash process and have that fulfillment and logistics capability in a central location. And lastly, looking at the end-to-end, I'm a big fan of the example that we have at the industrial manufacturing company, where we've been able to set up visibility in a very short period of time. So that within, I believe it was 10 to 12 weeks, we actually set up visibility across their inbound, their manufacturing, and their outbound distribution in one overview. And that actually allowed the team to manage that part better as a first step, but they've continued to evolve from there. But the end result of that is an increased efficiency in terms of how they manage the process, and they get a lot of automated alerts and recommendations to their control tower team, which is allowing them to really effectively steer their end-to-end supply chain. So these are just a few of the examples that we have, and as a next step, Joe and Navin are going to take you through 3 of our use cases in a little bit more detail. And first up, I will give the floor to Navin.
Thanks, Wouter. So thanks, Wouter, for kind of handing over to me. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to everyone about this specific case study that we're currently working on. It's with a global FMCG client. Wouter's kindly kind of talked you through the key elements of a control tower, and he specifically talked about plan, deliver, source, and make. The example that I'm going to quickly talk you through is related to an end-to-end control tower, and this control tower is end-to-end in its truest form. So we're not only working with a specific function, but we're working with cross-functional stakeholders in this global FMCG company. And typically what we are doing is we're re-engineering their end-to-end forecast to cash value chain. Now, what does that mean? So forecasting is something that's typically done by business functions, and there's finance, there's sales, and there's also supply chain involved in that. We're also working cross-functionally with the supply chain team and the logistics team, and also the cash collection team to ensure that the end-to-end forecast to cash process is fully re-engineered, streamlined, and re-engineered in such a way that it unlocks value for our client so that they can refocus their resources on growth driving activities. So the purpose of this whole project that we're doing with the client is to ensure that they're able to refocus their efforts on driving growth in a very uncertain environment, as you can all appreciate. Now, the program itself is broken down into a number of different elements, which again, Wouter has kind of touched on, but I'll kind of reiterate those points. So the first part of the program is making sure that we've got a coherent and standard end-to-end process that can be deployed globally. And we're looking at a number of processes to be redesigned, streamlined in such a way that can eliminate non-value adding activities. And also what we're trying to do is ensure that the processes are seamless across functions. Now, what many of you will be aware of is a number of inefficiencies in an organization is driven by the interfaces between functions. And what we're trying to do with this specific client is to ensure that they've got a seamless cross-functional process that kind of starts off with the forecasting right through to cash collection. So process re-engineering is a critical part of this program. The second part that we're working very closely with them on is technology. And again, as Wouter mentioned earlier on, technology is a key enabler to ensure that the process that we put in place is automated and streamlined and takes away some of the manual activities that the teams on the ground will have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, having to handle multiple spreadsheets, transfer data from one spreadsheet to another, all that is being eliminated through this program that we're delivering with a client. And we're using some very smart technology to do that. Some of it involves artificial intelligence. And what we're aiming to do in some circumstances is ensure that we can deploy, for example, no-touch forecasting or no-touch production planning to drive a more seamless end-to-end process for the client. What a lot of you will be familiar with is a lack of a single view of a forecast, and some of the technologies that we're implementing will eliminate that kind of key challenge within the client we're working with. So process and technology I've touched on. The third part is data, and data we frequently underestimate the importance of data in a transformation program. I can't stress how important and how central this is to ensuring that we deliver value and unlock value for the client we're working with. So ensuring that we have the right quality of data and the right kind of data sitting in a data lake for these pieces of smart technology to feed on and inform the business around decisions that need to be made or dashboards that need to be looked at. Ultimately, that data is going to be the lifeblood to drive the right decision making for our clients. The fourth part that we're working very closely with our client on is making sure we've got the right organizational design to drive this end-to-end streamlined value chain. And we're working with our client globally to ensure that we've got people allocated in the right roles from a market perspective, but also where we're able to ensure that some of the roles and processes are standardized to eliminate duplication out of kind of multiple areas of that end-to-end forecast to cash value chain. So there's a lot of organizational thinking that we're helping our clients with. What are the benefits of all of this? So I've kind of given you an overview of a global transformation program that we're working with our clients on. The benefits are huge, and not only are we seeing huge improvements in service level, but we're also seeing, as a result of this end-to-end connectivity and visibility, right through from forecasting through to implementation of promotions, for example, and kind of feeding back that EPOS and customer data back into the planning cycle, we're seeing that the inventory needed by our client to drive the right service level, that inventory level is actually on the decrease, and we're seeing a 15 to 30% reduction in inventory levels as a result of having a fully integrated program. The other last benefit that I'll touch on is the productivity increase. As a result of having smart processes, smart technology, and the right data in the right place to allow our client to make the right decisions, we're able to unlock a lot of value in the organization and redirect that that resource to be able to engage with the end customers, our clients' end customers, in a more productive way to drive win-win benefits for their client and for their customers as well. So that's a very quick overview of the work that we're doing with our global FMCG company. What I'll do is I'll hand you over to my colleague Joe, who'll talk to you about the work he's been doing with his clients as well. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Navin. It's a great case study. I want to share with you a couple control tower case studies here. One with the electronics manufacturer. What's interesting is how they get started and what they wind up delivering. The business had outsourced all their warehousing and distribution to a third-party logistics service provider, and they just felt they didn't have visibility to all the activity. So they came up with an initial goal of just being able to track their supply chain from port to customer. They put in a control tower. That control tower sat between their ERP, their WMS, and their TMS system. And from that just beginning very simple hypothesis, they found out the control tower provided for them quite a bit of gain, quite a bit of upside. A couple things they saw in the visibility, they were able to change and improve some of their procurement and contracting. They were able to improve their cost data capture, and they were able to do a better job at selecting carriers and invoicing their carriers, and the overall transportation process from an inbound and outbound perspective. So what starts out as a pretty basic hypothesis, I want more visibility, I don't feel like I have control over the data because it's controlled by my third party, becomes a very effective, a very interesting road to ROI on things you never thought about. So simple premise to start and very good outcome at the end. A couple of the metrics here to share with you is they saw in some cases improvements in labor reductions of 10 to 40% in certain departments, just because they had visibility, some better contracting on their procurement side, better choice of carrier selection, more optimization, better freight auditing. All that came out in the end. They didn't start with that list, but that's what happened once they got the control tower in place and could see their data and track themselves more accurately. It's one of the great surprises about putting in a control tower. Is as people get the visibility, the ideas start to flow and the use cases start to present themselves. One of the other side notes to this is this electronics manufacturer got this control tower in just in time. And when COVID hit them, they're one of the few in their area that were able to respond to COVID in a way that helped them maintain some of the revenue that some of their competitors were not able to maintain. So it was good timing. And it really helped them in this certain region of the globe as well to remain competitive during a very disruptive period. The second case study is around life science. What's interesting about this one was pegged to growth. They wanted to grow. They wanted to continue to do things for their network, their vendors, their suppliers, their providers, etc. So they said, I need data and I need control of that data, and they used the control tower to do that. So they were able to aggregate, one of the central tenets of this case study, they wanted to aggregate data at the hospital level, and from that aggregated data, make decisions. Some of the decisions were automated. So once they felt good about the data, they started getting better about application monitoring, getting better on the customer service side, being able to make faster solutions, being able to resolve issues with customers faster. And the other part of it was their development life cycle. As they would see an issue or see a desired functionality, they had the data, they had the visibility to make an informed and faster decision about how to approach the problem and correct it. A very fascinating outcome. Again, all driven just by visibility or an ability to put data in a central area, do analytics against it. So in this life science example, they took it to the next level, were able to drive changes in the way that they improvise and enhance and meet their customer needs through the analytics that the control tower provided. So a very interesting example. And then one of the other things they got out of it with no preconceived notion that this would be a benefit was better inventory management. So again, surprising outcomes based on a pretty simple hypothesis to start with: better visibility, better control of my data, better understanding of it. And again, several use cases flowed out of getting involved in the control tower, and several benefits they didn't anticipate were realized. So that's an interesting aspect of control tower. It's one thing you should ask yourself when you decide to go into one, is you may not have a list of 10 or 12 items from an ROI perspective to get capital improvement to do it. But what our experience shows us is if you have a few things you'd like to go at from a high level, that once you get this data visible, under control, can provide some analytics around it, the use cases really do flow, and the ROI flows from that as well. So thank you.
All right, thanks,
Emil?
Joe. Yeah, I'll be taking over from you. So I will be taking you through a few key get-rights for implementing a control tower, because of course implementing control towers doesn't go without any friction now and then. So these are the key get-rights that we always embed in our approach to make sure that we succeed. So I'm starting on the top right here. The first essential key get-right is that we always tell our clients to start with the why. Why do you want visibility, and what will you do with it? And this actually might sound really obvious, but it would surprise you how often it really isn't. Visibility is a starting point. It's the pivot point that allows you to move your supply chain from reactive to proactive. So by determining the strategy for the solution and looking ahead at what you want to achieve, what level of control tower maturity you want to achieve, through your cognitive technologies, as Wouter mentioned. So do you go for predictive? Is that a first step, or do you want to have prescriptive? You doing that places your focus on the right aspects of visibility. Now the second point, now that you have your strategy and you've answered the question of why, you need to start walking backwards with the end goal in mind to determine the steps that you need to take to start realizing this strategic advantage. By moving towards a bottom-up assessment, your starting point will actually be feet on the ground, looking at the requirements that you need to identify these steps. And as you might have experienced in any previous projects that you might have done, and we certainly have in the control tower projects that we've done, the reality is usually quite different from the blueprints that you've created at the beginning. So that's also why we recommend an agile approach to setting up the control tower. Agile does not mean that you don't work based on a plan. It means instead that you're working on a roadmap towards the vision, but the path towards that vision will become clearer once you get further into the project. But most importantly, it also enables you to test the setup of the control tower and adjust it along the way based on the continuous learning that you do. For example, from implementing a proof of concept, and by implementing those learnings, you can then industrialize or scale up for more countries or business units more flexibly. So talking about scaling up in an organization, scaling up actually works best if the organization itself is prepared for the changes that come with an implementation. So as Wouter mentioned earlier already, control towers are much more than just a dashboard. And it also comes back a little bit to my first point on what do you want to achieve. You're not just bringing a dashboard or a tool into the organization. You want it to result in an effect in the organization. So regardless of what that effect is, it will in almost all cases mean that the work itself will be changing. There will be a change in the way that the communication is done, either internally or externally. And you're almost guaranteed that also responsibilities will shift. So you are redesigning a team and their way of working. So it's not enough to just send in some login credentials to a dashboard and then a couple of frequently asked questions to the employees as well. You need to build people's capabilities in order to make sure that this team is going to be effective.